Hey y'all, I'm Hope, and today's video is my mid-month wrap-up for August. My reading has really picked up this month, and so I wanted to not have an end-of-month wrap-up that was super long, so I'm going to talk about a few of the books here just to create a little bit of extra space and make sure I'm not giving you guys like an hour-long wrap-up at the end of the month. So the first thing that I managed to read in this month was She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan, which was a huge accomplishment for me because I started this one back in like December of last year, and I'd kind of been putting it off because I was really enjoying it, but I was scared what was going to happen. And I was right to be scared, but I did finally finish it, and I loved this. I gave it 5 stars. It's a new favorite. I think this is a brilliant piece of historical fantasy. It's pretty light on the fantasy. It's mostly historical, but everything about this was so much fun. I think the world building is great. This, like, the sense of atmosphere that the author creates here in this, all of the historical details that she's built in, I think are really fantastic, and it really gives you a sense of like time and place. I thought that was really well done, and the characters are all super complex and interesting, and pretty much all morally gray. I think there's a couple who aren't, but mostly you have these very morally gray people who are just doing whatever they have to survive, to get ahead, whatever their goal is. And there's also some really interesting stuff happening in this book with gender in particular, but also with ideas of like fate and, you know, what is purpose, those kind of things. So I think this is a really brilliant book. I enjoyed every minute of this. This one is set in 14th century China following a young woman named Zhe who very early in life is told that her fate is nothingness and her brother's fate is greatness. And so there's a bandit attack and she sees her opportunity to steal his identity and pursue his fate as her own. And that's the inciting incident. That's what kicks off everything here. And she hits various obstacles, one in terms of like resources, but also she meets a rival, General Ouyang, who's one of the generals of the Mongol army. And during this period of Chinese history, China was being taken over and ruled by the Mongol Empire. And so at this point, they've already got most of the country under their rule, but they are still working on like reclaiming parts of southern China where rebels have kind of cropped up and are trying to drive the Mongols back out of China. And so that's kind of the context that Zhe finds herself in. She has this rivalry with General Ouyang. And then there's just like all kinds of political machinations happening. All the different characters have very different motivations. So there's like the politics of both the Mongol Empire itself and the things that General Ouyang experiences within like his own ranks and within like the family that he's working for, because he's works for the Prince of Hunan. But then there's also the politics of the rebels, and in particular Zhe interacts with the Red Turbans, who are a rebel group that she runs into fairly early on, and there's a lot of politics in with them as well. So it's very political. The fantasy is pretty light. It's just like a little bit here and there. Mostly this is very political, lots of military aspects because there's a lot about like training troops and how battles work and things like that. So much of this is just driven by these few individual characters and their motivations, and I thought it was brilliant. I loved everything about this book, and I just really, really highly recommend this. I have an arc of the sequel, and I'm super excited to be getting to that one, and I'm actually going to be starting that today, so I will be reading more of it soon. But everything about this was fantastic. The ending had me crying. The ending was brilliantly written. There's some really cool parallels in the endings for different characters, and I just am so excited to see what's going to happen in the second half of this duology. Then the second thing that I read was another book I really enjoyed, and this was The Last Word by Taylor Adams. I'd never read anything from this author before, but I really enjoyed this one. I would definitely go back and read some of his other works. This one is following a young woman who gives a 1-star review on a book and then thinks that the author is stalking her while she is house sitting in the Pacific Northwest. This one is just a like really fun, fast-paced thriller. There's a lot going on. I think my only main issue with this was that that doesn't really make sense. My primary issue with this book is that there's some stuff at the beginning that's a little too convenient, some assumptions that the main character jumps to that kind of get the ball rolling that I think didn't really make sense. But once things got started, it was fine, and the rest of the logic pretty much holds out. So I really enjoyed all of this book. I thought it was just a fun thriller. Like, it's been a while since I've read just like a straight thriller, and I had a really good time with this one. A lot of the twists were predictable, but there were a few that caught me off guard. So I think if you don't mind some predictable twists, this is a great one. It did manage to surprise me a little bit, although I did guess most of the twists for the end of the book. But there's a couple of conversations in here too that I think are really interesting. One of them is that, particularly with the killer, there's a lot of conversation around not specifically conversation around, but like you could have a conversation about entitlement and particularly men's entitlement to the like lives of others, the bodies of others, the resources, the good opinions of others, and just the sense of entitlement and how it creates a dangerous atmosphere, how it like becomes destructive for the people around them. So I think that that was a really interesting element with the killer here. And then also there's some stuff about true crime and the way that it profits off of victims, and I thought that that was a really interesting aspect. So I think this would be really great like book club book. There'd be a lot to talk about here, and I think this is just such a good time. After that, I listened to an audiobook, which was How to Defeat a Demon King in 10 Easy Steps by Andrew Rowe, which is a what is the word for it? Progression fantasy. It's like an RPG based fantasy, and it's about this young woman named Yui Shaw who lives in a world that is very Legend of Zelda-esque, where every 100 years a demon king rises, takes over half the world, and then a hero is born and defeats him. And then this time, the demon king has taken over more than half the world, and he's early. They're only like 20 something years into the next cycle, and so there's concerns that if he keeps going at the rate that he's going at, there won't be any world left for the hero to save. So a young woman named Yui Shaw really wants to be a hero, but she doesn't have the hero class. She can't reach the hero class, and so she decides to take a unconventional approach to becoming a hero. And I thought it was a really fun story. I liked the main character. I think the characters in this are a little flat. They very much fall into like RPG tropes, but I thought they were fun, and I like Yui Shaw and her kind of ingenuity, her creativity. It's very much a book about her thinking outside the box and coming up with new and creative solutions to the various obstacles that she faces. And it is actually ordered like you're in a guidebook of how to do this. So I think this is a really fun one if you like RPGs, especially if you like Legend of Zelda. There were a lot of Zelda references in this one that I thought were really fun. I'm not even that huge of a Zelda fan. I do like Legend of Zelda, but there were a lot of references that even I recognized and thought were really fun. And I think this is just like a quick, easy read. I had a great time listening to it. I think the audiobook is really good. So I think my main qualm with this is there is a lot of description. It's a lot of her telling you about the leveling systems and how they level up, what happens when you level up. So there's a lot of like description of RPG mechanics, which if you weren't already familiar with them might be useful, but if you are familiar with them, it came across as a little bit tedious. Like, yes, I know you're going to get your points, you're going to level up, etc., etc. So I thought that was a little frustrating at times, but overall I thought this was just a really fun story, and I enjoyed listening to it while I was working. So the last couple of things I read this month were some short stories, because I am TIing or teaching internshipping. I don't know what the right verb for that is. I'm doing a teaching internship for an undergraduate class this semester, and I had an opportunity to recommend a story for one of our last weeks. And so I was rereading some stories and reading a few new ones to try and find something to recommend, because it had been a while since I read any short stories that kind of fell within the kind of broader themes of the class, which are like environmental justice in literature and video games. So I was reading a lot of those, and I ended up rereading The Future of Work Compulsory by Martha Wells. There's a new version of this out just titled Compulsory, and so I read the new version. It's 99 cents on Kindle, so I was like, why not? I would say that I think the new version doesn't differ very much from the old version, so if you want to read this and you want to read the free version, they're very similar. There's just like a few details that have been added that help to tie Compulsory into the bigger Murderbot series. Some of the like language around Murderbot that has been kind of solidified within the series got worked into the story. That's kind of the main differences that I found there. But this is a really interesting story. It's Murderbot shortly after they've hacked their governor module, and it's one of the first instances of them kind of like going against hub system orders to save someone, and I thought that was interesting. I like this aspect of like free choice for Murderbot, but also there's a lot of stuff in it about like corporations and kind of capitalism at its worst. So I thought that was an interesting story. I think it's fun. I think I gave this like 4 or 5 stars the first time, and I gave it the same rating. I think 4 stars because it's fairly short and leaves a lot of details out. So I think I gave 4 stars both times I've read it. I think it's a fun story. If you like Murderbot, it's worth reading. If you're thinking you might want to read Murderbot, I think it gives you a nice like little sample of what Murderbot's voice is like. So I really like this story. Highly recommend it. I ended up also reading Wait for Night by Stephen Graham Jones, which is a vampire short story about a day laborer who finds something unexpected underneath a tree, and things go horribly wrong from there. I thought this was a lot of fun. I think I gave it 4 stars because, as with all of Jones' short fiction, I always want like more of it. There's always like all these interesting elements that get brought up and then they don't go anywhere because it's a short story. It's very short and you don't have space to do that. And I just, like, I wanted more of it. I really liked the main character of this story, Chessup, and I wanted more of his adventures that he gets on in, particularly at the end of this story and, like, onwards. I wanted more about his life after that point. I did really like the way this story progressed because it starts off fairly slow and then it becomes very, like, action-packed very quickly, and I thought that was fun. And I think it's a really good version of a vampire story. It's a vampire story that never says vampire, but it's clear that, like, that's what's happening if you're familiar with vampire tropes. And so I thought that was really fun, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it's a quick, easy little story, and I would like to recommend it to everybody to read, because I think if you like vampires, you're gonna like that story. Those were, like, the only two I think I put on Goodreads, but I did also end up reading Orris by Arkady Martine, which is not on Goodreads, so I couldn't, like, log it that way, but this is a very short story about a perfumer who makes an interesting decision in the wake of climate change decimating iris fields in Florence. And so basically the irises are no longer usable for perfuming, and she has to make an interesting decision in the wake of that happening. And it's kind of a near future sci-fi story about a world where climate change has, like, altered the soil in many ways, and so farming has become more difficult, and there's, like, a lot of synthetic stuff now being used because natural ingredients can't be acquired or extremely rare. So I thought it was really interesting. I like it. It's a very quiet story. It takes place over the span of, like, a single plane ride, but I thought it was a really interesting story and kind of investigates the main character's kind of reasoning for the things that she is doing. So I thought that was fun, and if you like kind of climate fiction, I think it's an interesting story to check out. I think it is available on New Scientist. I read it through my school's library because we had access to New Scientist, but I think you have to pay a subscription most of the time to read it, so it's a little hard to get your hands on, but I think it's an interesting story. So that's basically everything I've read in this first half of the month. I am currently in the middle of a couple of books, so I anticipate finishing several more before the end of the month, especially with classes starting. I know I'm going to be reading Othello, like, in the next week or so, so really looking forward to all of that, and I'm so glad that my reading is picked up. But I think that's pretty much all I have for you today. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, I hope you consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting every Tuesday and Saturday, so there is more content coming soon, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.